Welcome back to Old War Stories with Uncle Jay. This one is entitled, Cheaper is More Expensive. This can apply to a lot of things in life, and it really depends on how far you want to stretch it. I'll give you one example. Ninth grade English, the teacher said, get a little piece of paper and write something down on it. So I had this little notepad that you would open up and you'd write in it and then close it, and it had a spiral at the top, And anyway, he said, get a little piece of paper. So I didn't consider one of the leaves in this book to be a little piece of paper. So I tore off half of it. And he said to me, why are you being so cheap with the paper? Because I paid for it? It certainly had enough room for what I needed to write on it. So that was one thing. And as it is, all of these stories that I'm telling are on a little post-it note. There's like 7 or 8 of them on here. That's all I need. I don't need a whole piece of paper from a notebook to write 3 words on it. So that was one example of just being cheap. Maybe you're cleaning your windows and you're cheap with the Windex. Or maybe you get shitty quality paper towels and they just don't soak things up like the quilted quicker picker-upper wallet buster named Bounty that you don't need to spend fucking money on. But anyways, maybe you got a set of shitty paper towels from the dollar store and they really don't suck up much liquid and you get streaks on your windows. Well, then you're cleaning them again using more Windex, or better yet, another non-national brand glass cleaner that works just as good, if not even better. So that's another option. Well, my dad took this shit to the extreme. So after that thing with the Twin Towers in New York City that I can't name because Susan, after those came down in a crash and fiery aftermath and that, some years ago, that we hold a memorial for on the same day every year, sometime in September. Sometime after that, my dad, who was in Manhattan and had gone through that big, thick white cloud you saw going down the street, engulfing everybody, he was stationed back out on Long Island, where we are. So now, instead of taking the train or the subway and just walking around Manhattan, he was here and he would have to drive around to different places. Now, because it's the island, there's a lot less businesses and they are farther apart. So he had to drive, but he would get less calls because of that, because there were less customers of, things that had to be fixed. So anyways, he's out on Long Island. And he got to a call, and he went in, and he fixed whatever needed to be fixed. And he went back to his car, and he put the key in the ignition. Now, he had a 1987 Nissan Sentra. This was the base model car. It had a manual transmission. I learned to drive a manual transmission on that car. Thank you very much. Little fun fact. That car did not have a hydraulic assist clutch. It was a manual clutch. It did happen to have vacuum assist power brakes, so that was the one thing it had, which I guess was just standard. It had roll-down windows with the old cranks. It had manual door locks. It had no air conditioning, and it had no power steering, so you really had to grab this wheel and turn it good if you weren't moving much. That was a cheap car. It was cheap for a reason, but it was a Nissan. It was 1987. It was Japanese, and damn if he put a lot of fucking miles on that car. He put probably 100,000 miles on that car, buying it used over a weekend. Anyways, long and short of the story was it was a cheap car. Well, I guess over 170, 180,000 miles, it wasn't the ignition key that wore out. It was actually the cylinder, the lock cylinder, the ignition cylinder. That's what wore out. So he put the key in and it wouldn't turn. So he's like, oh, what the hell? And it was a double cut key, so he took it out, he put it in the other way, and he sat there playing for a half hour, and finally, by the grace of God, got the key to turn, and of course it started right up, and he got where he was going, and he's like, damn, that was weird, I don't know what the hell. And then it happened again, where he shut the key off, took it out, went on his merry way, and came back, and the key just wouldn't frickin' turn. So then he got the bright idea to do this, which was to, next time he actually got the key to work, he took the key off of his key ring. He would carry a spare key in his wallet in case he locked the keys in. So if you have a regular plain old metal key, that is something you should do. But anyways, can't do that nowadays with key fobs and transponders and shit like that, really. But anyways, he carried an extra key. So what he did was he put that key on his key ring, and the key in the ignition, he would simply turn it back one click to the accessory position. Now, as a side effect of doing that, the little clock on the radio, because this car had no separate digital clock like just about every other fucking car out there, at least back then did, the clock on the radio would stay on. But he wasn't concerned about the few milliamps of power that was pulling. He would go to work 5 days a week, and, you know, even if he was off, he really wasn't that concerned about it. And it never did leave him with a dead battery. But you can't just leave your car with the key in the fucking ignition. So he got a schmata, which was an old t-shirt. That's Yiddish for just an old rag. So an old rag of a torn t-shirt or something, and he just put it over the steering column and called it good. And he left the car like that for years and drove it that way for years. He would let himself in with the spare key on his key ring, and the other key stayed in the ignition, and he had to always remember never to turn it all the way off, just to the accessory position. I said, Dad, listen, I know the car isn't worth anything because it's old, it's got a zillion miles on it and whatever, but if this car gets stolen and insurance is going to give you $250, you can't buy another car for $250. And even if you get somebody's old junker, well, it's probably going to have other problems. You might have to do brakes, you might have to do wheel bearings, you might have to do this, you might have to do that. Who knows? Wouldn't it pay to get a new lock cylinder put in? Those things are over $100. But for the value of the vehicle, and I'm not saying the monetary insurance value, I'm saying the value of it being a car that you can get in, turn the key, and it's reliable, it starts, it drives, it goes, it takes you where you need to go, and was pretty good on gas with a little 1.6 liter engine, isn't the value of the vehicle worth more than $100? This is fine, this is fine. And for years and years and years and years and years, I always thought that somebody was going to break into this thing and steal it. They never did. Now, he also had this car actually broken into years prior when he used to drive it into Manhattan. They once smashed his window and stole his radio. That's a whole nother story for another time. But that was, you know, one other time. They also broke into his trunk, just a big screwdriver in the trunk lock, and just smack it with a hammer, break the lock open, and get in the trunk or something. So he rigged up This is actually a little funny side story. He rigged up a cable. This was the kind of car that was so cheap, it didn't have the little thing you could pull on the floor to open the trunk. If you actually know what a sedan is anymore, with all you millennials and your SUVs you don't need. Yeah, it had a lever on the floor that you would pull, and it was manual. And yeah, there were cars that had electric buttons and electric solenoids that would pop the trunk, and that's all fine and good too. This didn't have that at all. Okay, you needed to get in the trunk. You had to take the key out of the ignition, walk around the back of the car, stick the key in there, and open the trunk. And this car didn't even have flip-down rear seats. So he rigged up this cable that he somehow routed, and then he would go and he would unlock the back door, open the back door, grab this thin metal steel cable, wrap it around his hand, and pull it, and that would pop the latch on the trunk, and that was it. And he did that for years. Well, it so turns out the cable he had was a lot longer than it needed to be for the particular application. So he didn't care, he just left it on the floor in the back. So one day I got my license, and my sister and I and ex-Joe 81X went out, and we took his car, because I didn't have my old Chevy yet, so we took his car, he let us take his car. And anyway, we're driving or whatever, and I'm just going, and all of a sudden I hear boom, snap, and I look back and the trunk is open. I said, what the fuck just happened? Holy shit. I pull over. Ex-Joe 81X was sitting in the back seat, and of course no fault of his own with this long cable that was there like that. As he got out, his foot must have caught it and it fell out the door. So there's this cable that's dragging, and it just got in the right place that the back tire ran over it and pulled the latch and snapped the cable. It snapped actually at a length that was acceptable. So it kind of taught my dad a lesson. I guess he wanted to put this cable in the hopes that when he would eventually get rid of the car, because everybody knows it's not going to last forever taking it to work and back, eventually when he would have to get rid of the car or a major repair would come up and he'd get rid of it, he could undo the cable, take it out, and still have his nice pristine cable that was going to be stretched and bent in places and shit like that. So yeah, the cheapness of the ways. The cheapness of the ways. So that's cheaper is more expensive. Didn't end up biting him in the end. Fun fact, years later, he decided that it was time to get rid of the car, and it still ran, it still drove, and my friend Brian said, you know what, I could use a little beater car like that, and he bought it, and I think he spent the money to actually put an ignition cylinder in there, or something, or maybe he actually just left it with the key like that. I don't even remember. Anyways, when Brian had it, it actually rolled over 200,000 miles, and then he sold it to a friend. The windshield on it got smashed by another friend throwing a bicycle at it, and then I think it went to another friend, and I think the last we knew about this car was it had well over 250,000 miles on it and was still running. It was red, and it was painted black, matte black, flat black, you know. So this was a real beater car, but it really got around. And God only knows whatever happened, but it was never stolen. Another little tidbit about that car, my dad decided that he wanted to get something like the Club, but years prior they sold something that would be a clutch and steering wheel lock. It looked sort of like the Club, if anybody remembers that would go on your steering wheel, and the point of that was the handle was long enough that you couldn't turn the wheel because it would just hit the windshield, and obviously you're not going to turn the wheel and break the windshield, plus you wouldn't get it past the A-pillar anyways, so they would just break the lock on the Club and steal the car anyway. But they had this other one that would go around the metal thing above the part you step on for the clutch pedal, and then would latch on the steering wheel, and it would ratchet, and then you'd lock it. And that way it would lock your clutch and your steering wheel. But he didn't want to spend the money on that, nor did he want to spend the money on the club. So he got yet another steel cable. This steel cable he ran around the track on the passenger side seat. And this was a coiled steel cable, so it would always retract. And then the end of it had a loop, and he would take that, stretch it out, put it over the spoke of the steering wheel, around that, and lock the cable to itself with this padlock. And it was a heavy cable, and it was a heavy lock. But I always thought, well, you could just take a hacksaw and cut the steering wheel and get the cable off. It's better than nothing, or something, some crap like that. The club had flaws, the clutch lock had flaws, they all had flaws, but anyways, that was his ghetto rig of the club for the car. So anyway, that was cheaper is more expensive. This is how we did stuff when I was a kid. So, you know, I've carried on the tradition with certain things. But anyway, that's enough for this one. Thank you so much for watching this installment of Old War Stories with Uncle Jay. Make sure you click like, make sure you click subscribe, and take care. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.